She was struggling to buy a $50 cake for her twins. Then the billionaire who once walked out saw something he couldn't ignore. "Mama, why are you crying?" The little boy's question hung in the air as Margaret hastily wiped her tears, counting the same $28 for the fourth time. "It's nothing, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Just wishing I could give you more on your special day." Then a shadow fell across the bakery table, and she looked up into the face she'd dreamed about for 7 agonizing years. The father of her children, who never knew they existed. "Those boys," Julian's voice shattered with recognition, "they have my eyes." Their gazes locked in electric understanding as the truth crashed down between them. 7 years of separation, 7 years of believing the other had chosen money over love. 7 years of lies crafted by those who wanted them apart. In that heartbeat, everything changed. The billionaire who had walked away without knowing what he left behind was face to face with the family that had been stolen from him. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, his voice raw with grief and fury. Her answer would shatter everything he thought he knew. Welcome to Mr. Cael Stories. If you're a returning subscriber, thank you for your continued support. New to the channel, hit that subscribe button to join our storytelling family. Now settle in for a tale of lost love, painful secrets, and a reunion that will make you question, what would you sacrifice for the one who got away? 7 years of struggling alone had taught Margaret Sinclair to wear a brave face, to smile when her heart was breaking, to find creative ways to stretch every dollar for her boys. But today, their 7th birthday, the math wouldn't cooperate. $28 wouldn't buy the cake her twins deserved. Not in this upscale bakery she'd splurged on because Lucas and Nathan had pressed their noses against the window for weeks, dreaming of those magnificent creations. "Maybe we can go somewhere else," Nathan suggested quietly, too mature for his 7 years, always trying to make things easier for her. "No, honey, we're already here." Margaret ran her fingers through his hair, so like his father's, thick, dark, and slightly unruly. "Let me see what we can get." The bell above the door chimed, but Margaret didn't look up. She was too focused on the impossibility of her situation, on holding back tears that threatened to fall. The bakery owner's sympathetic glance only made it worse. "The twins excited about their birthday?" the woman asked kindly. "Very," Margaret forced a smile. "They've been counting down the days." "Those your boys, how old are they turning?" The deep male voice behind her sent electricity racing down her spine, a voice she'd heard in dreams for 7 years, a voice that once whispered promises against her skin. Slowly, Margaret turned, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. Julian Ashford stood there, impeccably dressed despite the rain soaking into his shoulders. His dark blue eyes, the exact shade their sons had inherited, widened as he took in her face, then darted to the boys at the display case. 7, she answered, barely able to form the word. "They're 7 today." She watched the calculations happen behind his eyes, the exact moment he understood. 7 years since their last night together, 7 years since they'd made love with a desperation that had left marks on both their souls. 9 months after that night, she'd given birth to their sons. "You have children," he said, his voice tight with shock. "My children." It wasn't a question. The resemblance was too striking to deny. Yes, one simple word that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken explanations. Julian's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of a nearby table. "Were you ever going to tell me?" "I tried," Margaret whispered, acutely aware of the bakery owner pretending not to listen. "I came to your home. I spoke to your father." "My father," Julian's expression darkened. "What did he say to you?" Before she could answer, Lucas bounded over, tugging at her sleeve. "Mama, they have a cake with rockets and racing cars. Can we get that one, please?" The hope in his eyes crushed her. "Sweetheart, that's a bit too expensive for us, maybe." "I'll get it," Julian interrupted, his voice rough with emotion. "Whatever cake they want." Lucas looked up at the tall stranger curiously. "Who are you?" A muscle jumped in Julian's jaw as he knelt to the boy's level. "My name is Julian. I'm an old friend of your mother's." Nathan approached cautiously, studying Julian with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. "You look like us." The simple observation hung in the air, loaded with implications neither child could possibly understand. Yes, Julian said softly, his eyes never leaving Margot's face. I suppose I do. Are you staying for our birthday? Lucas asked hopefully. We're having pizza too. Julian stood slowly, his expensive suit creasing. If your mother allows it, I'd very much like to. The weight of his gaze was almost physical, filled with questions and accusations, and a hunger that made Margot's cheeks flush despite everything. Boys, why don't you pick out your cake while I talk to Julian, she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. When the twins moved away, bubbling with excitement over the prospect of the fancy cake, Julian stepped closer. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, expensive and familiar, triggering memories of skin against skin, of pleasure so intense it had brought tears to her eyes. 7 years, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. 7 years I've been told you took money to disappear, that you wanted nothing to do with me, and now I find you here, with children, my children. Is that what he told you? Margot asked, a chill running through her despite the bakery's warmth. That I took money. $500,000, Julian confirmed. My father showed me the transfer records, the agreement you supposedly signed. And you believed him? Her voice trembled with 7 years of hurt. You thought I'd sell what we had for money. Julian's expression hardened. What was I supposed to think when you vanished? When you never answered my calls? When you disappeared from your apartment without a trace? I called you dozens of times, Margot countered, fighting to keep her voice down. I wrote letters. I came to your office building twice before security escorted me out. Confusion flickered across Julian's face. I never received any calls or letters, and security would have told me if. Your father said you knew I was pregnant, she cut in, needing him to understand. He said you sent him to handle the situation, to pay me off so I wouldn't ruin your career with a scandal. Understanding dawned in Julian's eyes, followed by a rage so cold it transformed his handsome face into something dangerous. My father orchestrated all of this. He kept us apart. He lied to both of us. Mama, Nathan called, can we get this one? The boys stood at the display case, pointing at the most elaborate cake in the shop, 3 tiers of chocolate and vanilla, decorated with racing cars, zooming around tracks and rockets, blasting toward ice stars. Margot looked at her sons, so excited, so innocent, unaware of the earth-shattering conversation happening mere feet away. Then at Julian, the father they'd never known, who looked at them now with naked longing and grief. Yes, she said to both her sons and their father. Yes, you can. If you're enjoying this story, give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment about what you would do in Margot's situation. Would you forgive someone who missed 7 years of your children's lives, even if it wasn't their fault? Stay with me to find out what happens when these two broken souls confront the truth that kept them apart. The bakery owner wrapped the extravagant cake with careful hands, stealing glances at the unfolding drama. Julian paid without looking at the total, his attention fixed on the twins, who were now excitedly pointing out features of their cake to each other. They like space and racing, Margot said softly, filling the charged silence between them. Lucas wants to be an astronaut. Nathan dreams about designing the fastest car in the world. Julian's throat worked as he swallowed, and they don't know about me. They know they have a father somewhere, Margot admitted. They've asked questions, of course. I told them their daddy couldn't be with us. But that doesn't mean he wouldn't have loved them if he could. A muscle jumped in Julian's jaw. Thank you for that, at least. What would you have had me say? Her voice cracked slightly. That their grandfather paid me to disappear, that their father's family considered them a scandal to be buried. I would have wanted the truth, Julian said, his voice low and intense, that their father never knew they existed, that he was lied to, that he would have moved heaven and earth to be with them if he'd known. Their eyes locked, 7 years of pain suspended between them like shattered glass. Would you have, Margot whispered, truly? Before he could answer, Lucas bounded over and tugged at Julian's sleeve. Are you coming to our party? It's at the park if it stops raining, but if not, we are having it at our apartment. It's small, but Mama made it nice. Julian knelt again, his eyes drinking in every detail of his son's face. I would be honored to attend your birthday party, if that's all right with you and your brother. It's okay with me, Lucas beamed. Right, Nathan? Nathan approached more cautiously, studying Julian with a thoughtfulness beyond his years. Why haven't we met you before if you're Mama's friend? Julian glanced at Margaret, seeking guidance. She gave a small nod, permission to answer without revealing everything at once. I've been away for a long time, Julian said carefully. Your mother and I lost touch, but I'm very glad to see her again, and to meet both of you. Do you want to see my drawings? Nathan asked suddenly. Mama says I'm really good. I can draw you a rocket if you want. Julian's composure nearly cracked. I would like that very much. As they left the bakery, the rain had stopped, leaving puddles that reflected the brightening sky. Julian insisted on carrying the cake box, walking beside Margaret while the boys raced ahead, jumping over puddles and laughing. My driver is waiting around the corner, he said quietly. Let me take you all home. Margaret hesitated. Julian, we need to talk before. I know, he cut in. We have 7 years of lies to unravel, but right now, it's their birthday. Let's not ruin that with our pain. The sleek black car drew stairs in Margaret's modest neighborhood. The twins were beside themselves with excitement at riding in such luxury, peppering Julian's driver with questions that the man answered with surprising patience. Their apartment building was a far cry from Julian's world, a walk-up in a working-class area, clean but showing its age. Margaret felt Julian taking it all in, measuring the life she'd built without him. It's not much, she said defensively, as she unlocked the door to Unit 3B. It's a home, Julian replied, his voice gentle. You've done this all alone, haven't you? The apartment was small but tidy, decorated with children's artwork and second-hand furniture Margaret had lovingly restored. Photos of the boys lined the walls, baby pictures, first steps, first day of school, a visual timeline of everything Julian had missed. He stopped before a particular photo, the twins on their 5th birthday, missing front teeth, cake smeared across their smiling faces. 5, he murmured, they were 5 here. Yes, Margaret set down her purse, watching him absorb these glimpses of lost years. I should have been here, Julian said, his voice rough with emotion. For this, for everything. The boys had disappeared into their bedroom, emerging with treasures to show their new friend, Nathan with his drawings, Lucas with his collection of toy cars. Look, Lucas thrust a small red sports car into Julian's hand. This one's my favorite. It goes really fast. Julian turned the small toy over in his palm. It's beautiful. You know I have a car like this, a real one. Lucas's eyes widened comically. You do, can I see it sometime? Perhaps, Julian said carefully, looking to Margaret for guidance. She busied herself setting out paper plates and napkins, trying to process the surreal turn this day had taken. 7 years of struggling alone, of lying awake wondering if she'd made the right choice, and now Julian was here, sitting cross-legged on her worn carpet with their sons. The doorbell rang, the pizza delivery. Julian insisted on paying despite Margaret's protests. Please, he said quietly, let me do this small thing. It's nothing compared to what I've missed. As the twins devoured their pizza, Julian moved to help Margaret in the tiny kitchen, standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. You look tired, he observed, his voice low. Single motherhood will do that, she replied, trying to keep her tone light. When was the last time you slept through the night, or had a day to yourself? Margaret laughed softly. I don't remember. His hand reached out, fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. The simple contact sent electricity racing through her veins. You're still so beautiful, he murmured, even more than I remembered. Margaret stepped back, her pulse racing. Julian, don't, we can't just. I know, he conceded, but I've thought about you every day for 7 years. Even when I believed you'd chosen money over me, I couldn't stop wanting you. The rawness of his confession stole her breath. We were young, she said weakly. We barely knew each other. 4 months, 3 days, Julian counted. That's how long we were together before you disappeared. And in that time, I knew more about you than people I'd known my entire life. I knew how you take your coffee, how you hum when you're concentrating, the exact sound you make when you. Julian, she warned, glancing toward the dining area where the boys were eating. His eyes darkened with memories they both shared. Tell me you haven't thought about it, about us, about what we had. Of course I have, Margaret admitted. But we're not those people anymore. You're a billionaire CEO. I'm a struggling single mother. And there are two little boys who deserve better than adults who can't get past their own drama. Julian studied her face, something like admiration softening his expression. You've always been the stronger one, even back then. I had to be, she said simply. Mama, Lucas called, can we have cake now? The moment broken, they returned to the small dining table. Julian helped light the candles, standing back as Margaret carried the magnificent cake to her beaming sons. Make a wish, she told them as they prepared to blow out their candles. Nathan and Lucas exchanged glances, seeming to communicate without words as twins often do. Then they closed their eyes tight, drew deep breaths, and extinguished all 7 flames in one go. What did you wish for? Julian asked. We can't tell, Lucas said seriously, or it won't come true. Nathan looked at Julian thoughtfully, but I think it might be coming true already. As the afternoon wore on, Julian became increasingly aware of how limited Margaret's resources were. The twins' gifts were modest, new shoes they clearly needed, books from the used bookstore, hand-sewn superhero capes. Margaret must have stayed up late to finish. When the boys were distracted with their presents, Julian pulled Margaret aside. Let me give them something, he said quietly, please. They're not going to know you're their father today, Margaret said firmly. It's too much, too fast. I understand that, but as your friend, as someone who cares, let me do this. She relented, and Julian made a quick call. 30 minutes later, his assistant arrived with gifts that made the twins' jaws drop, the latest gaming console, science kits, and remote-controlled cars that were exactly what they'd dreamed of, but never dared ask for. Are you rich? Lucas asked Julian bluntly after unwrapping his third present. Julian laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his serious face. I suppose I am, but you know what? Money doesn't buy the most important things. Like what? Nathan wanted to know. Julian's eyes met Margaret's across the room. Like family, like being with people you care about. Later, as the excitement wound down, the twins began to crash from their sugar high. Lucas fell asleep on the couch mid-sentence. Nathan's eyelids drooped as he tried to finish showing Julian his sketchbook. They need to rest, Margaret said softly. It's been an overwhelming day. Julian nodded, helping her carry Lucas to the bedroom the boys shared. He stood in the doorway watching as she tucked them in, kissing each forehead gently. When she returned to the living room, Julian was gathering his coat. I should go. Yes. She agreed, though part of her wanted him to stay, wanted to continue this conversation until they'd excavated every painful truth. We have a lot to discuss, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. About the past, about their future, about us. Is there still an us? Margaret asked before she could stop herself. Julian stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head to maintain eye contact. There has always been an us, Margaret, even when oceans and lies separated us, even when I believed the worst. There was never anyone else who made me feel what you did. Julian. I'm not asking for answers tonight, he said gently. You're exhausted. The boys have had an emotional day even if they don't realize it, but I need you to know I'm not walking away again, not from them, not from you. His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone in a gesture so achingly familiar it made her throat tighten. Whatever my father did, whatever lies were told, I'm here now, and I intend to stay if you'll let me. Before she could respond, he leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead, a touch so tender it made her eyes sting with unshed tears. Tomorrow, he promised, we'll talk tomorrow. After he left, Margaret sank onto her sofa, surrounded by wrapping paper and new toys and the remains of a cake that cost more than her electric bill. The day had been a whirlwind that left her dizzy with possibilities and fears. Julian knew about his sons. Julian wanted to be part of their lives. Julian still looked at her with that same heat that had once consumed them both. But 7 years had passed. 7 years of different paths, different worlds. Could they truly bridge that gap? And more importantly, should they try? In the quiet apartment, with her boys sleeping peacefully down the hall, Margaret allowed herself to remember what they'd once been, young and passionate, believing they had all the time in the world, before his father's manipulation. before she'd faced pregnancy alone, before life had hardened them both in different ways. Tomorrow would bring complications, explanations, difficult decisions, but tonight, for the first time in 7 years, Margaret allowed herself to hope. What would you do if you discovered you'd been lied to for 7 years? If the person you thought abandoned you had been manipulated just as cruelly? Drop a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to like this video if you're invested in Julian and Margaret's journey. The road to forgiveness isn't easy, but the destination might be worth every painful step. Morning sunlight streamed through the threadbare curtains of Margaret's apartment, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying Julian's words, his touch, the look in his eyes when he first saw the twins. The boys were still asleep, exhausted from their birthday excitement. Margaret moved quietly in the kitchen, brewing coffee and trying to process everything that had happened. Her phone buzzed with a text message. "I'd like to see you and the boys today. There's so much to discuss. I can come to you or send a car if you prefer." So formal, so careful, so unlike the passionate, impulsive Julian she'd fallen for 7 years ago. But then, they were different people now. "The boys have school," she replied. "Perhaps we could talk alone first." His response came immediately, "Of course, I'll send a car at 9. After getting the twins ready and walking them to school, their backpacks loaded with birthday treats to share with classmates, Margaret returned home to prepare herself for what would undoubtedly be one of the most important conversations of her life. The car Julian sent was sleek and discreet, with a driver who opened the door for her without comment. 20 minutes later, they pulled up to a waterfront building that screamed wealth from every gleaming window. Julian was waiting in the lobby, dressed more casually than yesterday, but still exuding power and privilege in his tailored jeans and cashmere sweater. The sight of him made her heart race treacherously. "Thank you for coming," he said, guiding her toward a private elevator. "I thought we could speak freely here." His penthouse occupied the entire top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city. Margaret stood awkwardly in the vast open space, acutely aware of her simple clothes and worn boots. "Coffee," Julian offered. "Please." He moved with practiced efficiency in the gourmet kitchen, preparing 2 cups. "Still take it with 1 sugar." The fact that he remembered such a small detail after 7 years made something twist inside her chest. "Yes." Julian handed her the mug, their fingers brushing briefly. "Sit, please." They settled on opposite ends of a plush sofa. The distance between them felt both necessary and unbearable. "I spoke to my father last night," Julian said without preamble. Margaret's grip tightened on her mug, and he didn't deny it. Julian's voice was controlled, but rage simmered beneath the surface. "When confronted with evidence, with the fact that I'd met you and the boys, he admitted everything. The lies, the interception of your calls and letters, the false documents showing a payment you never received." Why, the question was barely audible. Why would he do that to his own son? Julian's jaw tightened. Control, power. The company was expanding internationally. I was young, ambitious, working 18-hour days. He said a pregnancy, a relationship that distracted me from my responsibilities, would have derailed everything. "And you believe him?" "I believe he convinced himself he was acting in my best interest." Julian's laugh was bitter. The great Preston Ashford, always knowing what's best for everyone, especially his son. Margaret set her coffee down, hands trembling slightly. "He told me you knew, that you sent him to pay me off." "I would never," Julian's voice cracked with emotion. "Margaret, you must know that, whatever we had, however brief it was real to me." "It was real to me too," she admitted softly. "So real that when he told me you wanted nothing to do with our child, it nearly destroyed me." Julian moved closer, the distance between them shrinking both physically and emotionally. "Tell me what happened. That day you came to the estate. I need to understand everything." Margaret closed her eyes, the memory still painful after all these years. "I was scared, so scared. I just found out I was pregnant, and I didn't know how you'd react. We'd never discussed children, never talked about a future beyond our next date." "But you came to tell me anyway," Julian prompted gently. "Yes, I believed you deserved to know, whatever you decided to do with the information." She took a shaky breath. Your father met me at the door, said you were away on business, but that he'd been expecting me. I was in Tokyo, Julian said quietly, a last-minute trip he insisted I take. He invited me in, very cordial at first, asked about my symptoms, how far along I thought I was. Margaret's voice grew distant with the memory. Then his demeanor changed completely. He said my timing was unfortunately strategic, that you were about to sign contracts that would secure your future. Julian's expression darkened. The Asia expansion deals. He said a scandal involving a cocktail waitress would destroy everything you'd worked for. The old hurt colored her words. That's all I was to him, a complication to be eliminated. Julian's hand found hers, warm and solid. What happened next? He offered me money, $500,000 to disappear, to never contact you again. Margaret's eyes met his, fierce with remembered dignity. I refused it. I told him I just wanted you to know about your child, that you deserved the choice. And he told you I'd already made my choice, Julian finished, the pieces falling into place, that I'd sent him to handle my mistake. Margaret nodded, tears threatening. He was very convincing, said you'd worked too hard to let a momentary pleasure ruin your future. She pulled her hand away from his. I left without taking a penny, tried calling you for weeks afterward. Eventually, I had to accept that what we had meant more to me than it did to you. Julian stood abruptly, packing the expansive living room. All this time, he said, his voice raw with suppressed emotion. All these years, I thought you'd taken the money and run, that what we shared meant nothing compared to financial security. And I thought you'd chosen your empire over our child, Margaret replied. We were both wrong. Julian stopped packing, turning to face her with an expression that made her breath catch. When did you learn you were having twins? At my 12-week scan, she said softly. I was alone in that sterile room when the technician showed me 2 heartbeats. I laughed and cried at the same time. Double the blessing, double the challenge. You did it alone, Julian said, his voice thick with admiration and regret. You raised 2 beautiful boys without help, without support. I had some help, Margaret corrected. My neighbor Mrs. Castillo watches them after school. The diner owner where I work lets me adjust my shifts around their schedule. We've managed. Julian knelt before her, taking both her hands in his. You've done more than manage. You've given them love, stability, values. They're incredible children, Margaret. The compliment warmed her more than she wanted to admit. They're the best parts of both of us. I want to be part of their lives, Julian said earnestly. Whatever that looks like, whatever boundaries you need to set. I've missed 7 years. I don't want to miss another day. And how do you propose we explain this to them? Margaret asked. They're 7, Julian. They've created an entire mythology around their absent father. Finding out that you're suddenly here, that you want to be involved, it will change everything for them. We'll be honest, Julian said. Age-appropriate honesty, of course. They don't need to know the manipulation, the lies. Just that there was a misunderstanding, that I didn't know about them, but now I do, and I want nothing more than to be their father. The sincerity in his eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't the impetuous young man she'd fallen for. This was a man tempered by success and hardship, by believing himself betrayed for 7 years. And us, the question slipped out before she could stop it. Where do we stand in all this? Julian's gaze intensified. That depends on you, on what you want. What I want, Margaret laughed softly. No one has asked me that in a very long time. I'm asking now. His thumb traced circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. What do you want, Margaret? The answer was complicated. She wanted security for her boys. She wanted to stop worrying about rent and school supplies and whether she could afford new shoes when they outgrew their current pair. She wanted to sleep through the night without anxiety dreams about unpaid bills. But beyond those practical concerns, there were wants she'd buried deep. The want for companionship, for passion, for the connection she'd only ever felt with the man kneeling before her now. I want what's best for Lucas and Nathan, she said finally. Everything else is secondary. Julian studied her face, reading between the lines. And if what's best for them includes having both parents in their lives, not just as co-parents, but as a family. The implication hung between them, weighty with possibility. We're not the same people we were 7 years ago, Margaret said carefully. No, we're not, Julian agreed. We're older, wiser, hopefully. I've built an empire but came home to an empty penthouse every night. You've created a beautiful family without a penny of my fortune. Maybe we're exactly who we need to be now." Before Margaret could respond, Julian's phone rang. He glanced at it, frowning. "I need to take this. It's the investigator." "Investigator?" Margaret questioned. Julian held up one finger, answering the call. "Ashford, yes, when? I see. No, that won't be necessary. I'll handle it personally, thank you." He ended the call, his expression hardening. "My father is on his way to your apartment as we speak. Apparently, he learned where you live and decided to take matters into his own hands." Alarm shot through Margaret. "What does that mean? The boys are at school, the apartment is empty." "He doesn't know that," Julian said grimly, already moving toward the door. "Come on, we need to get there before he does something we'll all regret." The drive back to Margaret's neighborhood was tense, Julian making calls from the back seat while Margaret twisted her hands in her lap. "Why would he go to my apartment?" she asked. "What does he hope to accomplish?" "Control," Julian said flatly. "He's losing his grip on the situation, on me. He's desperate to maintain the narrative he created." When they arrived, a sleek black sedan was already parked outside her building. Julian's expression darkened as he recognized his father's car. "Stay behind me," he instructed as they hurried up the stairs. Preston Ashford stood in the hallway outside Margaret's apartment, impeccably dressed in a three-piece suit that cost more than her monthly rent. He turned as they approached, his expression moving from determination to surprise to calculated smoothness. "Julian," he acknowledged, "I was just about to." "About to what?" Julian cut in, his voice dangerously quiet. "Break into Margaret's apartment, threaten her again, offer more money that she never wanted in the first place." The older man straightened, adjusting his cuffs. "I think we should discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss," Julian said flatly. "You lied to me for 7 years. You kept my children from me. You manipulated and threatened their mother." "I protected you," Preston countered. "You were 26, with the future of our company in your hands. A scandal, an unplanned pregnancy." "My sons are not a scandal," Julian's voice rose for the first time. "They're my children, my blood, my legacy, far more than any company could ever be." Preston's gaze shifted to Margaret, cold and calculating. "You've certainly accomplished what you set out to do, found a way back into my son's life, into his wallet." "That's enough." Julian stepped forward, physically placing himself between Margaret and his father. "You don't speak to her, you don't come near her or the boys. If you try, I'll use every resource at my disposal to ensure you regret it." Something in Julian's tone must have conveyed his absolute seriousness, because Preston's expression shifted from contempt to uncertainty. "You would choose them over your own father, over the company we built." "Without hesitation," Julian confirmed. "Now leave before I call security and have you removed." Preston's jaw tightened, but he recognized defeat when he saw it. With a final cold glance at Margaret, he turned and walked away. When his footsteps faded down the stairs, Margaret released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Would you really choose us over your company, your father?" Julian turned to her, his expression softening. "The company is just assets and contracts. My father made his choice 7 years ago when he decided to play God with our lives." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You and the boys are what matters now." The tenderness in his touch contrasted with the steel in his voice moments earlier. This was a different Julian than the passionate young man she'd known. This was someone who knew his mind, who fought for what mattered, who wouldn't be manipulated or controlled. "We should pick up the boys from school," Margaret said, suddenly feeling the weight of everything that had transpired. "They'll be done soon, and I think it's time we told them the truth." Julian's expression was a mixture of anticipation and fear. "Are you sure?" "No," she admitted with a small smile, "but waiting won't make it easier. They deserve to know their father wants to be in their lives." The walk to the elementary school was surreal, Margaret Sinclair and Julian Ashford side by side, preparing to forever change the lives of 2 little boys who had no idea what awaited them. "Will they hate me?" Julian asked quietly as they approached the school gates, "for not being there until now?" Margaret considered the question seriously. "They might be confused, even angry at first, but they're good boys, Julian. They've wanted a father for so long, I think they'll forgive more quickly than you imagine. And you, his voice dropped lower, will you forgive me someday for believing the worst about you, for not fighting harder to find you? Before she could answer, the school bell rang and children began pouring out of the building. Lucas spotted her first, his face lighting up as he raced toward her. Mama, you came early. Then he noticed Julian and skidded to a stop. You came back. Nathan, look who's here. Nathan approached more cautiously, studying Julian with that same intense gaze. Did you come to see our school? Julian knelt to their level, his expensive trousers touching the dusty playground. Actually, your mother and I wanted to talk to you both about something important, something good, I hope. The twins exchanged glances, that silent communication passing between them. Are you Mama's boyfriend now? Lucas asked bluntly. Julian chuckled, glancing up at Margaret. That's complicated, but what I want to talk to you about is even more important than that. We could go to the park, Margaret suggested, have that talk somewhere nice. The nearby park was quiet on a weekday afternoon. Margaret and Julian sat the boys down on a bench, standing before them with nervous energy. You both know that everyone has a father and a mother, Margaret began carefully. Like how Tommy has his dad on weekends, and Zoe has two moms, Nathan nodded, always quick to demonstrate his understanding. Right, Margaret smiled, and you've asked me many times about your father. Lucas's expression grew serious. You said he couldn't be with us, but that doesn't mean he wouldn't love us if he could. Julian's breath caught audibly at hearing his own words from the day before, repeated by his son. That's true, Margaret confirmed, but what I didn't know, what neither of us knew, was that your father never knew about you. The twins' expressions shifted to confusion. There was a misunderstanding, Margaret continued, searching for age-appropriate words. Your father and I lost touch before I knew I was having you. He didn't know you were born or where we were. So he couldn't find us, Nathan asked, piecing it together. No, he couldn't, Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. Not until yesterday, when I walked into that bakery and saw you both. Silence fell as the twins processed his words. Understanding dawned on Lucas's face first. You're our dad, he whispered, eyes wide with disbelief. Julian nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Nathan stood, approaching Julian cautiously. That's why you look like us, that's why you have the same eyes. Yes, Julian managed, I'm your father, and I know I've missed 7 years, and I can never get those back, but if you'll let me, I want to be part of your lives now. I want to know everything about you. I want to be there for birthdays and school plays and everyday moments. Lucas launched himself at Julian without warning, small arms wrapping around his neck, with such force that Julian nearly lost his balance. After a moment's hesitation, Nathan joined the embrace, more reserved but equally meaningful. Over their heads, Julian's eyes met Margaret's, shining with tears and gratitude. This moment, this acceptance from sons who had every right to reject him, was a gift he knew he didn't deserve. And watching them together, seeing the missing piece of her family finally slide into place, Margaret felt something crack open inside her chest. Something that had been sealed away 7 years ago when she believed herself abandoned. The possibility of forgiveness, the possibility of healing, the possibility of love. If you've ever experienced a moment that changed everything, a truth revealed, a misunderstanding cleared, a family reunited, leave a comment below. We're shaped not just by what happens to us, but by how we respond when given a second chance. Will Julian, Margaret, and their boys find their way forward together? Stay tuned for the emotional conclusion to this journey. The following weeks unfolded in a whirlwind of changes. Julian immersed himself in his sons' lives with an intensity that both moved and terrified Margaret. He rearranged billion-dollar meetings to attend Nathan's art show, cancelled a flight to Tokyo to coach Lucas's soccer practice, showed up at their apartment with educational games, books, and the quiet determination of a man making up for lost time. You don't have to bring gifts every time, Margaret told him after he arrived with 2 junior science kits that had the twins bouncing with excitement. I know, Julian said, watching the boys tear open the packages, but I've missed 7 birthdays, 7 Christmases, 7 years of being able to see their faces light up. The raw emotion in his voice silenced her objections. On a crisp Saturday morning 3 weeks after their reunion, Julian arrived at their apartment earlier than expected. Margaret answered the door in her pajamas, hair tousled from sleep, momentarily freezing as their eyes met. "I'm sorry," he said, though his gaze suggested he wasn't sorry at all as it traveled over her thin cotton top and flannel pants. "I thought you'd be up." "The boys are still sleeping," she said, self-consciously crossing her arms. "They had a late night." Julian stepped inside, close enough that she could smell his cologne, expensive and familiar in a way that made her pulse quicken. "I actually came to talk to you before they wake up." In the kitchen, Margaret busied herself making coffee, acutely aware of Julian watching her movements. The small space felt even smaller with his presence filling it. "I've been thinking," he began, accepting the mug she handed him. "This arrangement isn't sustainable." Margaret's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Me visiting for a few hours every day, racing across town between meetings, trying to cram fatherhood into scheduled windows of time." Julian set his coffee down, his expression intense. "I want more, Margaret. I want to be there when they wake up with nightmares, when they need help with homework, when they're sick or scared or just want their father." "What are you suggesting?" she asked carefully. "Let me buy you a house," he said without preamble. "Something close to their school, with a yard, with room for them to grow, where I can have a space too." Margaret stiffened. "I don't want your charity, Julian." "It's not charity," he countered. "It's providing for my children. It's making up for 7 years of child support I should have been paying. It's giving them the life they deserve." "And where would I fit in this arrangement?" Margaret asked, the convenient live-in mother. Julian's expression softened. "You know that's not how I see you." A dangerous silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken desires and fears. "I can't depend on you financially," Margaret finally said. "I won't." "Why not?" Julian challenged. "Is your pride worth more than giving our sons opportunities, than making their lives easier?" "Because what happens when this novelty wears off?" Her voice cracked slightly. "When you realize fatherhood isn't all soccer games and science projects, when your father's disapproval or your shareholders' opinions start to matter again, I can't risk uprooting their lives, my life, for something temporary." Julian moved closer, trapping her against the kitchen counter. "Is that what you think this is, temporary?" His proximity was disorienting. Margaret could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the intensity in his blue eyes, the same eyes their sons had inherited. "I don't know what this is," she admitted softly. "We barely knew each other 7 years ago, Julian. A few months of passion doesn't build the foundation for co-parenting, let alone anything more." "Then let's build that foundation now," he said, his voice dropping lower. "Let me prove to you that I'm here to stay, that what I feel for you, what I've always felt, isn't temporary." Before she could respond, the patter of small feet announced the twins' awakening. Julian stepped back, the moment suspended between them as Lucas and Nathan burst into the kitchen. "Dad," Lucas exclaimed, the title still new and wonderful on his lips. "You came early." "I promised to take you fishing, didn't I?" Julian smiled, easily shifting into father mode while Margaret tried to steady her racing heart. That evening, after the boys returned sun-kissed and triumphant with stories of the fish that got away, Julian lingered as Margaret tucked them into bed. "They're exhausted," she said, closing their bedroom door softly. "Thank you for today. They had a wonderful time." "I did too." Julian stood in her small living room, seemingly reluctant to leave. "Margaret, about this morning." "I've been thinking about what you said," she interrupted. "About a house." Hope flickered across his face. "And I won't accept ownership of a property," she said firmly, "but I would consider an arrangement where you lease a place that works for all of us, something modest, not extravagant, where you could stay sometimes to be closer to the boys." Julian studied her face, and that's all it would be, a practical arrangement for the children. The question hung between them, loaded with subtext. "For now," Margaret said softly, "one step at a time." 2 weeks later, they moved into a comfortable 4-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. Though Julian had clearly restrained himself from buying the most lavish property available, the home was still nicer than anything Margaret had ever lived in: gleaming hardwood floors, a modern kitchen, a backyard where the boys could play. Julian had taken her conditions seriously. The house was leased in his name. He maintained his penthouse downtown, but spent most nights in the guest room down the hall from the twins' bedrooms. He never flaunted his wealth, though his presence inevitably changed their lives in countless ways. The refrigerator was always stocked. Bills vanished before Margaret could worry about them. The twins enrolled in swimming lessons and art classes they'd previously only dreamed of. And slowly, cautiously, the ice between Julian and Margaret began to thaw. It happened in small moments, their hands brushing as they both reached for the coffee pot, shared laughter over the twins' antics, late-night conversations after the boys were asleep, rediscovering each other one story at a time. "You never told me what happened with your father," Margaret said one evening as they sat on the patio, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Julian's expression hardened. "He's been removed from the board of directors, taking early retirement, according to the press release." "You're doing..." "I gave him a choice," Julian said, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Step down gracefully or face a very public exposure of his actions. He chose self-preservation, as always." "That couldn't have been easy," Margaret observed. "He's still your father." "A father who stole 7 years with my sons," Julian's voice was tight, "who nearly destroyed what we had. No, it wasn't easy, but it was necessary." Margaret studied his profile in the fading light. This harder edge was new. The Julian she'd known had been passionate, but never ruthless. She wasn't sure if the change disturbed or attracted her. "Perhaps both." "What about you?" he asked, changing the subject. "You never told me about the day they were born." Margaret smiled at the memory. "It was terrifying, beautiful. I was in labor for 26 hours. Alone." The word was heavy with regret. "My neighbor Mrs. Castillo was there," she said gently. "She held my hand through the worst of it, called me her brave girl when I wanted to give up." Julian set his glass down, moving to kneel beside her chair. "I should have been there, should have been the one holding your hand, telling you how strong you were." "You're here now," Margaret whispered, the weight of forgiveness in her words. His hand covered hers, warm and solid. "I've thought about you every day for 7 years, he confessed, his voice rough. "Even when I believed the worst, I couldn't stop wanting you, couldn't stop wondering what might have been." The admission hung between them, charged with possibility. Julian's thumb traced circles on her wrist, sending electricity up her arm. "Julian," she breathed, uncertain if it was warning or invitation. He rose slowly, never breaking eye contact. "Tell me to stop, Margaret. Tell me you don't feel this too, and I'll never mention it again. We'll co-parent, we'll be friends, nothing more." But she couldn't say the words, couldn't deny the current that had always existed between them, that 7 years of separation had somehow only intensified. When his lips finally met hers, it felt like coming home after a very long journey. Familiar yet new, comfort and excitement intertwined. His hands framed her face with reverence, the kiss deepening as she responded with equal hunger. "Wait," she gasped, pulling back slightly. "The boys are asleep," he finished, his breath warm against her lips. "But you're right, not here." He stood, offering his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Margaret took it, allowing him to lead her inside, down the hallway, past the children's rooms to the master bedroom she'd claimed as her own. At the threshold, Julian paused. "Are you sure?" In answer, Margaret reached up, drawing his head down for another kiss. Whatever doubts she harbored about their future, about the wisdom of complicating their already complex relationship, dissolved beneath the certainty of his touch. They came together with the desperate intensity of lovers reunited after too long apart. Julian's hands remembered her body with devastating accuracy, the curve of her waist, the sensitive spot beneath her ear, the way she arched when he traced her collarbone with his lips. 7 years, he murmured against her skin, "and you're still the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Clothes fell away, barriers both physical and emotional discarded as they rediscovered each other in the moonlight filtering through gauzy curtains. Julian took his time, worshipping every inch of her with lips and hands until Margaret trembled with need. "Please," she whispered, pulling him closer. "Julian, please." When they finally joined, it felt like completion, like finding a missing piece neither had known was lost. They moved together with increasing urgency, Julian's name falling from her lips like a prayer as pleasure built between them. After, tangled in sheets, and each other's arms, reality began to seep back in. Margaret lay with her head on Julian's chest, listening to his heartbeat gradually slow. "What happens now?" she asked, the question echoing their conversation from weeks ago, but with new meaning. Julian's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Whatever we want to happen, we've lost enough time to lies and misunderstandings, Margaret. I don't want to waste another moment pretending I don't want everything with you." "Everything is a lot," she said softly. "We're not just two people falling in love. We are parents with children who need stability, consistency. And you think I can't provide that?" A hint of hurt colored his voice. Margaret propped herself up to look at him. "I think your world is very different from mine. I think we need to be sure before we promise the boys a family that might not last." Julian cupped her face, his expression serious. "I've built billion-dollar companies, negotiated deals that changed industries, but nothing has ever mattered to me the way you and those boys do. I can't promise we won't face challenges, but I can promise I'll fight for us every day for the rest of my life." The conviction in his voice, in his eyes, melted the last of her resistance. "One day at a time," she agreed, settling back against his chest. "We'll figure it out together." In the months that followed, they created a new normal. Julian officially moved into the master bedroom. The twins adjusted to having both parents under one roof with the resilience of childhood, accepting their new reality with joy. There were adjustments, of course. Margaret insisted on maintaining her independence, finding work as an office manager that allowed her to be home when the boys finished school. Julian learned to balance his corporate responsibilities with family life, prioritizing dinners together and weekend activities over late meetings. On a warm evening 6 months after their reunion, Julian took Margaret back to the bakery where they'd found each other again. "Feeling nostalgic?" she teased as they walked inside. "Something like that." Julian guided her to a table by the window, the same table where she'd counted insufficient funds for her son's birthday cake. The bakery owner recognized them, smiling knowingly as she brought over coffee without being asked. "Why are we really here?" Margaret asked, noting Julian's unusual nervousness. "This place changed everything," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I walked in a different man than I am today. I walked in alone and walked out with the family I never knew I had." Margaret's heart began to race as Julian reached into his pocket, producing a small velvet box. "I'm not asking because of the boys," he said before she could speak. "Though they're reason enough to want forever with you, I'm asking because these past months have been the happiest of my life, because I fall more in love with you every day, with your strength, your kindness, your fierce protection of our sons." He opened the box, revealing a ring that managed to be both elegant and understated, a perfect reflection of Margaret herself. 7 years ago, I would have asked impulsively, swept away by passion, Julian continued. "Today, I'm asking with complete certainty, Margaret Sinclair, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making up for the years we lost?" Tears blurred Margaret's vision as she looked at the man before her, not the wealthy CEO the world knew, but the father who sat patiently helping with science projects, the lover who held her through nightmares, the partner who respected her need for independence even as he offered security. "Yes," she whispered, her voice gaining strength with certainty. "Yes, Julian, I will." Later that evening, they told the twins, who responded with characteristic enthusiasm. "Does this mean we'll be a real family?" Nathan asked thoughtfully, "with the same last name and everything?" "We already are a real family," Julian assured him, pulling both boys close. "The paperwork just makes it official." As the twins raced off to share the news with their friends, Julian turned to Margaret, drawing her into his arms. "Happy," he murmured against her hair. "Complete," she corrected, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. For the first time in 7 years, completely whole. On their wedding day, Lucas and Nathan served as joint best men, proudly bearing rings for the parents they'd once wished for on every birthday candle. And as Julian slipped the wedding band onto Margaret's finger, he made a silent vow, not just to her, but to their sons. No more lost time, no more separate paths, only forward together, making each day count twice as much to fill the spaces of the years they'd lost. That night, holding Margaret in their bed, Julian whispered against her skin, "Do you ever think about having more children? A little girl with your eyes, perhaps. Margaret smiled in the darkness. I might be persuaded, she teased, with the right incentives. As his lips found hers once more, Julian knew with absolute certainty this was what real wealth looked like. Not the numbers in his bank accounts or the properties in his portfolio, but this woman in his arms, their sons sleeping down the hall, and the future stretching before them, limitless with possibility. 7 years ago, a lie had torn them apart. Today, truth had made them whole again, stronger, wiser, and infinitely more grateful for the second chance they'd been given. Some love stories take detours, some families form in unexpected ways, but sometimes, if you're very lucky, the road leads exactly where you were always meant to be. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need reminding that second chances are possible. Sometimes what seems like an ending is just the beginning of something more beautiful than we could have imagined. Subscribe to Mr. Cael Stories for more tales that remind us of the power of love, forgiveness, and the family we choose. What unexpected second chance has changed your life? Share your story in the comments below.